Good evening and welcome back to ParaGhoul Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark. If you're new here, this radio show and podcast dives deep into the shadows of Saskatchewan's past to learn what lies within. Sometimes we even go to other locations across Canada to chat about dark history, mysteries, urban legends, and sometimes even monsters. I'm your host, Katie Kulpa. I'm a horror author and paranormal researcher in Regina, Saskatchewan. I love digging into the past to bring life to ghosts and monsters hiding in the dark, and I especially love going live with you every week to tell you what I've uncovered. Tonight, we're having our last local Saskatchewan Haunts episodes of Season 1, if you can believe it. Although we'll likely be talking about local Saskatchewan haunts in the season finale, I'm sure. But in order to celebrate the first official season of ParaGhoul Paranormal coming to an end, I wanted to go back to one of the first haunted locations that I covered as part of my Haunted Saskatchewan blog series on my website. So if you still don't know, or you don't know me, or you haven't been following me for a while, yes, I started out with doing this Haunted Saskatchewan blog series on my blog, and I would go out and take pictures of some of these haunted locations. So that was where I started back in 2021. It's hard to believe we're now a radio show and podcast. Very cool. But yeah, so who we're covering tonight, or the location we're covering tonight, is still one of the most popular blog posts that gets visited from people that find me through Google to this day. Alongside another Saskatchewan haunted building known as the Screaming House, if you've heard of it. But tonight, we're going back in time to talk about one of my favorite locations. This is a location that I haven't been able to personally tour because, unfortunately, the building no longer exists. It was torn down back in 2017. However, I would still love to visit the site because I feel like we could try to answer one of those old questions of what happens to the ghosts when the building is gone. Do the ghosts haunt the building or do they haunt the land? But anyway, let's talk about the history and ghost stories of the Fort San Sanatorium. Honestly, this is one of my favorite topics when we talk about haunted locations in Saskatchewan. I was sad to learn that I came to touring the haunted locations too late, so I missed being able to see Fort San for myself. Now, that doesn't stop me from having it still on my bucket list to tour, though. So if anyone knows the owner of the land, maybe you can convince them to let me do a mini investigation sometime to learn if the ghosts are still around. I did have a viewer on my YouTube channel say that, like I said, my YouTube channel also has some of where I had my early tours during the Haunted Saskatchewan time, and they had commented on it. Saying that they believe the reason the public is no longer allowed on the site is due to asbestos that had been used in the building. So when it was demolished, there could still be asbestos in the soil, so the public is not supposed to be allowed access. Which is too bad if that's true, but maybe they'd still let me on if I'm wearing a mask? I don't know. Anyway, enough of me fangirling over a haunted location. Let's get into the history. So the Fort San Sanatorium was the first sanatorium built in Saskatchewan. It opened as the Tuberculosis Sanatorium in 1917, and it operated right up until 1971. So it was the primary tuberculosis treatment facility until 1925, when the Saskatoon Sanatorium opened. So it was the first and it was the only one for about 8 years. So the claim is that Fort San was actually leading the battle against tuberculosis in Canada in the 1920s, as it is said to have had the most advanced treatment options. So the Fort San Sanatorium was located on a 184-acre lot and had 4 main buildings that were recognized as heritage buildings before they were torn down. So there was the main lodge, its west wing, Dr. Jenner's residence is what the building was called, and the administration building, as well as a nurse's residence. So the setting was chosen specifically for the exposure to the south sun along the ravine, as well as for protection from the South Saskatchewan winds. if you live in Regina, or I guess really anywhere in southern Saskatchewan, then you know what kind of winds we are talking about here and why this would be, within the specifications of a good location is to protect those that are being treated from the wind. So apparently it was built with a campus style in mind. They wanted to create this beautiful place for those with tuberculosis to heal instead of having it just feel like a hospital. And as it would turn out, this would turn into a really good design feature for the buildings for as long as it was open, because then they were able to use it for other things. So the sanatorium itself was situated in a very beautiful setting of Echo Lake. And I actually, funny enough, just drove by there again this weekend, as we like to take the kids to the Echo Valley Provincial Park, which is really close to Fort San. And it is still a very picturesque area. You have a beautiful view of the Echo Lake, the beaches, and there's lots of homes along the water. There are also some nice walking paths, which I believe are known as the Trans-Canada Trails, which were unfortunately this past weekend under a ton of water and ice thanks to the warm temperatures and melting snow, so I wasn't able to use them, but it's still a beautiful area. I highly recommend visiting, especially in the summer months. I know they have some winter stuff too that you can do, but summer months it's just really beautiful. So the Fort San Resort Village, which was officially incorporated in 1987, is still there with approximately 233 residents. At least that's according to their website, which I looked up to find out. But it is a really beautiful little community to check out. But now, let's go back to the original sanatorium. So originally it was large enough that it could hold close to 360 patients at one time. I think I had found a statistic somewhere that said at its peak, or at its most full, it had 358 patients. So it was also the main treatment center for soldiers suffering from tuberculosis after they traveled back to Saskatchewan following the First World War. So there was also a lot of soldiers that stayed there, back in the 1900s. And the buildings each have architectural features that were related to the arts and craft or Tudor revival style, or so says Historic Places of Canada. Again, the building is no longer, so I can't really go out and tell you for sure. However, there's lots of pictures of the building, so you can see what it looked like in its prime, or, even when it was right before it was demolished, you can still find a lot of pictures of it. But the main lodge and west wing were each 2.5 stories high, and it is said that it had a front veranda, bay windows, and a rear tower. The Dr. Jenner residence was also 2 stories with an open front porch. The nearby administration building was again 2 stories with an enclosed front porch, and apparently they had some beautiful French doors as the central doorway. Finally, the nurse's residence was another 2.5-story building with a front veranda and an open balcony. And apparently the nurse's residence also had a veranda in the back, which had a rear sun or sleeping area. Now, of course, as new medicines were found to cure tuberculosis, the need for large campus-style facilities like the Fort San Sanatorium were no longer needed. As the decline in the need for the beds in the sanatorium rose, other uses for the building had to be found. In an article from the Regina Leader-Post on August 4th, 1960, the Fort San Report, or as it was headlined, stated, "The tuberculosis sanatorium at Fort Qu'Appelle, with over half its beds space unused, may be converted to some other use. A special committee, which has been investigating in the past year the bed use in sanatoriums in this province, is expected to submit a report Friday to the annual meeting of the Board of Directors of the Saskatchewan Anti-Tuberculosis League at Fort Qu'Appelle. The report will not be released to the public until the board has studied it, but it is strongly believed that the committee will recommend a change at Fort Qu'Appelle. So the first use of this campus-style building, as I said, it would come in handy later on, was for the Saskatchewan Summer School of the Arts. So this school opened in 1967 and would actually continue to have these summer programs right up until 1991, allowing thousands of people to attend for dance, music, visual arts, writing, and theater. I was able to find an article in the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix from August 2nd of 1967, which had this to say about the new school. There were other advantages in using some of the facilities no longer required by the TB Sanatorium. The buildings were adaptable with a minimum of capital needed for renovation. The site was close to the location of the existing Arts Summer School at Valley Centre. Core programs already in operation could easily be related to the project at Fort Qu'Appelle. So apparently, at the time of this article, renovations had already begun over the winter on 2 of the pavilions, which could house up to 60 students. And the school was likely very relieved to have access to these buildings, as they were expected to have actually up to 600 students that summer, and they were expecting rapid growth continuing every year, which turned out to be true, as I found another article in the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix from May 2nd, 1970. So this latest article said that the summer school had actually 1,000 students attending from July 5th through to September 6th. That year alone, they had programs for stage bands, creative writing, Polish, Ukrainian, and Highland dancing, ballet, spinning, which I'm not sure what spinning is, so you'll have to let me know, and weaving. Unfortunately, the school would run out of funding because this was a government-funded building, or provincial government-funded building, I believe, leading it to its closing its doors in 1991. Now, luckily for the building, the Echo Valley Conference Centre did take over portions of the building before the Saskatchewan Summer School of the Arts completely shut down. So then some of the rooms and sections of the building were also being rented by other organizations. And one of these organizations was actually the Royal Canadian Sea Cadets. So they actually had their HMCS Qu'Appelle Cadet Summer Training each summer from somewhere in the 1990s until 2004. So during this time, it said that one of the original operating rooms was actually converted to a 4-bunk barrack room to be used by these Sea Cadets. And apparently the Sea Cadets even slept in an area directly above the morgue, making you wonder if they had unusual experiences in the building while they slept. However, even as the conference center, the building remained having difficulty staying afloat. I found an article in the Regina Leader-Post from February of 1984, and this article stated, 20 years after medical research cut the white plague down to a manageable size, the future of the old tuberculosis sanatorium on the north shore of Echo Lake is still unclear. A legislative committee on health facilities toured the former Fort San Sanatorium Wednesday, wondering what to do with the many dilapidated rooms and 40 to 70-year-old buildings. Some considered fire traps by modern standards. So can you imagine that? Even in the 80s, they were considered fire traps. So I can only imagine what they would have been in 2017. Anyway, I'll continue the article. Echo Valley Centre, a conference and recreational spot run by the province, has taken over much of the sanatorium, while various organizations have rented out other space. But the government isn't convinced that maintaining all the old buildings at Fort San makes good financial sense. So back in 1984, in this article, it was reported that the center was only taking in $940,000 in revenue when operating costs were $1.3 million. leading it to be even more uneconomical to do renovations when they were already losing money on the property. And interestingly enough, in an article directly below this one, so the same, newspaper, same date, I found another article talking about how one of the bigger organizations that rented a portion of the Fort San property was excited to move to a brand new location. So the sanatorium was losing even more revenue just within the same day that this newspaper article was written. So it really goes to show you that they were losing money, like quite a bit of money in the 1980s. So if you add the potential of asbestos in the walls, which wouldn't be surprising considering it was built in the 1910s, it's no wonder that the building was demolished in 2017. Although it's still unfortunate, as it seems to be the way many of these old buildings that have been used by artists in creative programming throughout the years are going these days. It just seems to be that's the way it is right now, which is really unfortunate. But what about the ghost stories? I know that not everyone agrees about whether or not the sanatorium was actually haunted. I know my father being one of them. He actually stayed at the Echo Valley Conference Center before it was demolished for a corporate function when I was young. So this was before the building was demolished. I think it was for a work thing, and I think he stayed like 2 weeks or something. And he didn't recall having any sort of spooky experience while staying there. And many others also look back at their stays in the buildings as really wonderful experiences. So there's quite a few people that actually really enjoyed the center and were sad to see it leave, which I can understand. As you know, I am a horror author, so I like to be involved in the Saskatchewan Writers Guild events, and I love going to writing retreats and doing things like that. So it would be unfortunate to lose any of the buildings. And I know we're losing a lot of them in Saskatchewan, unfortunately. But there are still others that have had different experiences that aren't so lovely, I suppose you could say, or just a little spooky. So I didn't search for exact numbers of how many people died while staying at the sanatorium before tuberculosis had a cure, rendering the facility no longer needed. But another article on 650 CKOM did say that it was in the thousands, which would definitely make it a potential hotspot for ghosts, especially when you add in, the fear and the worry that would have filled the halls before the tuberculosis cure was found. And in many articles that I read about this facility and about tuberculosis specifically from that time, it sounds like it was really similar to what a cancer diagnosis is today. So in many cases, you weren't sure you were going to survive it, and then you were being sent to this facility and you were going to hope that it was going to work. So, adding in the terror, the illness, as well as the worry that you may never leave the building to go home, I could see it being a very terrifying place to be while alive during that time. So I can only imagine how much of that energy might have been able to stay within the walls of the building. So one of the claims is that a nurse still walked the halls of the center long after it was no longer used as a sanatorium. Some say she, ignored you. Some say she was helpful. So it just kind of depends on the stories that you found. So I was able to find a few on a couple different websites that I'll share with you. And then you can decide. I don't know. But apparently she was known as Nurse Jane. And she had been seen by multiple people. Sometimes she's folding linens. So, helping prepare beds for patients. Or she'd also been seen pushing a wheelchair. Another person claimed to see a woman in a bathroom, which at the time when this person was at the facility, it was being used for a boys' section of the music camp. So it'd be quite unusual to see a woman in the boys' side of the camp. And so when he approached her, she didn't respond to him, acted like she couldn't even hear him. And then she walked further into the bathroom out of his view. When he then went into the bathroom to, ask her what she was doing there, the bathroom was empty. The woman had disappeared. Apparently, that wasn't the only occurrence of a woman, in or around a bathroom being seen. I found another blog post on WordPress that talked about attendees of a wedding at the conference center. So at the time it was being used for a wedding. And these attendees kept constantly asking who the lovely woman in the hall was that helped them find the bathroom. Apparently, some unknown woman was helping people that were getting lost, looking for the bathroom, or trying to come back from the bathroom back to where the wedding area was. And so she would show them the way and then just disappear. But they never did find out who it was, so they think it was this ghost of, potentially Nurse Jane even. And the reason why they say it's Nurse Jane, or so the story goes, is I didn't, go try digging into deaths within the facility because, one, the facility is no longer, so I don't know that it is still a haunted location. And two, if there really were thousands of people that had passed away in relation to the facility, it would take a long time to find this one. But the story goes that a nurse had committed suicide while working at the sanatorium. But again, I didn't dig into it. It would probably take a long time to figure that out for sure and to be able to say whether or not that's true. But you can decide whether or not you believe that one. I also heard a couple stories about food or drinks being knocked off kitchen counters by unseen forces. So this is where, caterers come in, or someone is renting one of the facilities and using the kitchen, only to find messes being left on the floor, but no one around to cause them. So the overall consensus is that there is a feeling, just a general uneasy feeling to the atmosphere when you would enter some of these places, some of these buildings. Many said it felt dark and heavy, and it even made some people not want to enter certain areas of the different buildings at all. Like they refused to enter because of how heavy it felt. I found some stories that people shared on places like Reddit talking about, going through for a walk through the abandoned building, only to have doors slamming around them or cupboard doors opening all at the same time on both sides of the kitchens. Like the kitchen seemed to be an area where a lot of activity happened. I wonder why, why it would be the kitchen. But anyway, kitchens and bathrooms are the common places that would have been in the Fort San facility that ghosts hung out with, I guess. And another one I found on a random WordPress blog, again from 2009, talked about someone that commented on their original blog post. Apparently this commenter had said that they actually stayed in the sanatorium, or a relative did. I can't remember off the top of my head now. And what happened to them is, while they were trying to sleep in a bed or trying to rest on a bed, they felt someone pick up their arm as if to check their pulse. But when they opened their eyes, nobody was there. Yet their hand was up in the air, as if someone had just been there and just left. And I don't know, as soon as I read that, I could feel it. I think a lot of us can kind of understand exactly what that would feel like. So I don't know, that's kind of creepy to open your eyes and no one's there. Although, is it as creepy as someone just randomly picking up your hand to check your pulse? I don't know. What do you think? Of course, you get a lot of the typical haunted experiences as well, like knocks, footsteps, supposedly growls on electric voice recorders, the sounds of wheelchair wheels squeaking. Again, apparently there used to be a lot of those typical haunted sounds in the location. So what about Fort San today? As I said at the beginning, all of the Fort San Sanatorium buildings are no longer. They have all been demolished for various reasons, whether it's asbestos related or not. And now it is primarily a green space that is private property. You can see where the original driveway is that went up, and you can see some of the old lighting that they had along the driveway. But again, it's private property. If you know whoever owns the property and they'd be okay with me walking along the path sometime just to see if the ghosts are still there or if they left with the building, let me know. Like I said, it's still on my bucket list. But there's also a lot of other stuff in the area that makes it a fun location to visit. So the Fort San Resort Village website talks about the Trans-Canada Trail, which we talked about, which is that safe walking path with rest stops along the way. And again, this is all along the shore of Echo Lake, so it's a very beautiful place to check out. And when I was out there on the weekend, there were still a lot of ice fishing shacks on the lake, so it is another popular place to go ice fishing in the winter. But in the summer, it's really beautiful and picturesque. And given you're so close to Fort Capel, of course, you have access to the library, the museum, restaurants, and many other things. And the Fort San Resort Village website also boasts that there are lots of year-round activities to enjoy, including golfing, downhill skiing, and year-round lake access. So there you go. Whether you like ice fishing or boating, you'll have year-round lake access. So now you can see why this place is on my bucket list to investigate. It would answer a really big question that has likely plagued many that get involved with the paranormal or that go searching for ghosts. And that's what happens to the ghosts when the buildings are torn down. Is it the area that is haunted? Or is it in the building materials, like the stone in the walls, that the ghosts are connected with? Because maybe the stone somehow absorbs their energy of when they were living. I know I've heard theories about that. But what do you think? Thank you for joining us tonight. Did you know I have a weekly newsletter that includes a link to the latest episode of ParaGhoul Paranormal? Subscribers also receive updates about upcoming events, behind-the-scenes information, and subscriber-only updates on upcoming book releases, book signings, and more. If you're interested, make sure you head over to my website at kdkulpa.com to sign up. As I said, you can also check out my old Haunted Saskatchewan blog posts, which I started back in 2021. Didn't know it would come to this, but hey, it's pretty cool. And if you haven't heard yet, my new sci-fi horror book, Unearthed, has been released. If you like movies like Alien or Predator, then make sure you check it out. Now, next week, we are having a guest return to the show for our final official guest episode of Season 1. Kenton is coming back, but not to talk about his Unsolved Canadian Mysteries podcast. You might remember he was, I think, the first guest him and Dylan, I believe, were the first guests on the show. But instead, we will be talking about his upcoming Regina Cemetery tours. I've been on the tour myself, so I would highly recommend you check it out. And if you want to learn more about the tours and the themes that he focuses on, then make sure you tune in to our show next week. So stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we'll uncover more secrets, unravel more mysteries, and delve deeper into the shadows. Until then, remember to keep your flashlight handy and digital recorders ready. This is Katie Kulpa, signing off. Until next time, my ghouls.